Being the trade-obsessed goblin that I am, I've counted 18 different stars who I think could easily be traded, and even if half of them do, we could be in for one of the wildest NBA off seasons ever. Hello everybody, welcome to Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel and drop a like on this video, and check us out over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you would like to enjoy this as an audio-only experience. I'm just going to be running through these teams slash players and then explain the situation, and then I'm going to be giving them a rating out of 10 for how likely I think it is that these teams will move these players. So as I mentioned, I counted 18 different players, and let's start out in the East. For the Philadelphia 76ers, the star who would be on the move, of course, would be Joel Embiid, because I think if they're trying to usher in a new era, Tyrese Maxey is young enough that the Sixers would still just stick with him as their lead option, try and see what they can do with Tyrese Maxey and Jared McCain as a backcourt. I don't think he'd be on the move, and then you can't really consider Paul George a star player anymore, so that leaves Joel Embiid. And if he does not end up retiring, I do think the Sixers will probably be more likely to hold on to him than to let him go, just because his value is going to be extremely minuscule, but potentially there could be some team out there that's willing to invest in just the possibility that he could be that guy again. A team like the Miami Heat comes to mind, just with their history of conditioning and all of that, although they also don't have the best medicals history, what NBA franchise does. But I would just say a 4 out of 10 chance that he's traded this offseason. Probably, sadly, more likely that he ends up having to retire, but I'd rather him be moved than that. With the Atlanta Hawks, you of course have Trae Young, and I would have said, based on this year before the trade deadline, that he would probably stick around for another year, because there were quite a few players having good seasons out there, especially DeAndre Hunter, who was averaging 20 points per game off of the bench, which he is a player that they invested a lot in, so seeing that deal actually work out was huge. So what did they do with that? They were like, well, this can't be real. DeAndre Hunter isn't actually good. He's just putting up inflated stats on my team. So we're going to trade him for second-round picks. If you got a first, I wouldn't be roasting you for it, but trading a player as good as DeAndre Hunter for second-round picks is a fucking joke. Karis LeVert is a decent enough NBA player. He's been good since he's gotten there, but in terms of the long-term purview, they were going for those picks first and foremost, and Karis was just fills the void of a scoring sixth man. I hate that deal, and I think Trae can look at that as a valid enough reason to ask out. You're telling me after years of me not having a really good second option, one of them breaks out and you immediately trade him for seconds? Fuck that noise. Not to mention Jalen Johnson getting hurt, so that's made this tail end of the season even more of a carry job for Trae Young than normal. So the Hawks have still managed to be a play-in team because the East is pathetic as it is. But Trae is starting to get at an age, and he's been there long enough through a bunch of horseshit that it would be completely within his reason to ask for a trade, and I'm going to say there's an 8 out of 10 chance that that happens. For the Milwaukee Bucks, Giannis Antetokounmpo. This is one of the superstars who could actually end up being on the move. I think he's up there. I would give him a 7 out of 10 chance of being traded this offseason, and it is especially true if Damian Lillard's blood clots end up being a larger issue. Apparently, they're trying to bring him back for the playoffs, so that could mix things up a little bit, but it really seems like the future of this team is hopeless, as they are draft capital destitute. They have a bunch of money tied into players that are not very good, and those players have very little trade value as a result, so getting out of those contracts will not be easy. Something like moving on from Damian Lillard, at this point, I feel like you'd get very little back for him, so your best case is you get 2 good role players, and you have Giannis, 2 good role players, Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez and Kyle Kuzma. I'd be asking out if I were Giannis at that point. And also, if I'm the Bucks, I think getting ahead of this sooner than later is the move. So if you could just have Giannis be like, hey, I wouldn't mind being traded. And then they went about it, that would work out really heavily in their favor. And then, of course, if Giannis did get dealt, there is a 10 out of 10 chance that Damian Lillard is being traded because there's no reason for him to want to stay there, and there's no reason for the Bucks to want to keep him. So Damian Lillard would definitely be on the move if Giannis is gone. Even if Damian Lillard is slightly overpaid for what he gives you this day and age, he's still well worth investing in as your second option, especially as your third option, especially if you have some bad contracts that you can throw in the mix. And there's some NBA team out there that can and will do that. For the Miami Heat, I think there is like a 4 out of 10 chance that Bam Adebayo might get moved. I would have felt a little bit differently if the Miami Heat had fared better post the Jimmy Butler deal. I was really confident in the idea of Ware as the 5, Bam as the 4, Tyler Hero all out here playing at an all-star level, plus Andrew Wiggins and Nikola Jovic as 2 players who can fill in the final 2 spots really, really, really well. Hasn't really worked out. Bam doesn't really work as a floor spacer. Ware has had developments in that area, but they're still big men at the end of the day. Neither of them are true snipers by any means, so not really getting the full effect of the double bigs that we saw out of like the Cleveland Cavaliers. This could be developed further, and Bam isn't 30 yet, but he's getting at an age, he's getting at a contract situation, and the Heat are at a point that wouldn't surprise me if he was on the move, but I'm not going to give high odds for that. I think there'll be another year, or we'll at least get to the trade deadline before there's any real noise about that. As for Tyler Hero, I think Tyler Hero is younger and will get a longer investment as a result of that, and will be willing to stay there for longer just because they're like, yeah, dude, you're first in shot attempts by a wide margin. Go out there and put up 30 while we get the 11th seed and then we get a draft pick, But I don't think they trade him, and I don't think they're going to trade Bam Adebayo this offseason. But it is a possibility, a very real one. The Charlotte Hornets with LaMelo Ball. LaMelo has been weird. It has been hard to evaluate how good LaMelo is this year because before this, the big excuse was that technically when LaMelo plays, they play like 500 basketball, which isn't great, but is a lot better than what the Hornets do otherwise. But that has not been the case. He's been mostly healthy this year, like the most healthy he's been in at least a very long time. Let me just confirm the games played difference. Yeah, he's at 47 games. He hasn't played that much since 2022. I don't know if he's shut down for the year or not. Doesn't appear that he is. So there's a decent chance he can get the 50-game threshold. Before that, 22 games. Before that, 36. And his efficiency this year has been poo-poo. If we just go to his last 3 seasons, all-star season and beyond, 21 points per game, 8 assists per game, 1.5 steals. He is shooting 38% from 3 on 8.5 attempts per game and 42% from the field, which is not great because his 2-point percentage is not great. He's a career 47% from there. I do still believe there is a world where LaMelo is a remarkable second option, setting up a big man. I don't know who that big man is going to be, but the team that is willing to make this investment is going to go under the assumption that he's probably not going to be particularly available. You got to wait for the stars to align there. Maybe he actually strikes health at an older age in the NBA, but it's starting to look very bleak for him. The fact that I'm talking about 47 games played like it's a fucking miracle. If he can prolong some of the health that he's showed this year, he's still one of the best playmakers in basketball. He's still a really great high volume 3-point shooter, even if he is at 34% on the year on 11 attempts per game, which is really high to be shooting 34%. And he definitely has some shot selection issues. The idea of him with Victor was there for a little bit, especially when it looked like they might get that draft pick. I'm not sure how many first option big men are left in the NBA right now. Do we want to see what LaMelo would look like next to Jokic? I don't know. But something like that, him setting up a guy who's more of a play finisher, maybe playing alongside Giannis, something like that. Don't know how that would work itself out. LaMelo, I still think he's very good, but he's in a bad situation in Charlotte, and his game has not impacted winning as much as I would like, and he's definitely definitely earned the badge of shot chucker that he's been getting lately. He's still a very unselfish player, but he does take a dumb shot 1 out of every 5 of them, if not 1 out of every 4. I would say there's a 5 out of 10 chance of him getting dealt, and that is purely just on the fact that his value is probably not that good. And the Hornets are like, we've still just been waiting to figure out what this guy can do. This season was kind of weird, but we're going to give it more time. I think it wouldn't make sense for Charlotte to pursue a deal. But if LaMelo potentially wanted out, and if there was someone out there willing to give them a very good deal, then it would probably work. And I'd give that a 5 out of 10. Out west, the Phoenix Suns are all but certainly going to trade Book and KD, but especially KD. All reports indicate that there's basically a 10 out of 10 chance that Kevin Durant is going to be on the move this offseason. And while Durant's stature in the league has slowly dwindled over the last couple of years, he's still a top 10 NBA player, or at least top 15. He is still a remarkable scorer. I think he needs to be in a 1B or second option situation because of his playmaking being limited, because his mid-range shot making, especially being as high volume as it is, you'd want him to be paired with a star who is either a dominant paint player or a dominant three-point shooter. And a big one for that has been Nikola Jokic. The Oklahoma City Thunder have been speculated as well. There is a video on this channel from back around the trade deadline where I talked about where Kevin Durant would be dealt if he is dealt, so you can go check that out. The Dallas Mavericks are another one, but I don't like that because he'd probably be 1A in that situation, maybe 1B to Anthony Davis, but it's not great. But regardless of what the situation may be, Kevin Durant's going to be moved. I would be shocked if he's a Phoenix Sun next year. Now, Devin Booker is young enough that they could potentially try and convince him to see this through, but he's not like young. Devin Booker has been in the NBA for a long time because he was really young when he got in the league. And he is now 28 and he will be 29 at the start of next season. He's getting close to his 30s. He should definitely get up out of there. So I would give that deal an 8 out of 10 chance, and I really pray that he goes to Detroit. For the Memphis Grizzlies, we have Ja Morant, and this one is a complete fucking wild card because there is a lot of pressure on Ja right now. I would say he has a somewhat similar circumstance to what Magic Johnson dealt with in 1982 when he publicly demanded a trade and got his coach Paul Westhead fired. That was more direct action and not just implicated, but there is this very strong implication that Ja more or less got Taylor Jenkins fired. How true that actually is, how direct his role in that actually was, I do feel as though the way that the offense snuffed Ja out of the equation is the number one problem that got Jenkins fired. So at the end of the day, Ja got him fired, whether it was direct or indirect. And that means a lot of pressure on him because if he ends up playing bad in this postseason, there's going to be a lot of people looking at him sideways, being like, well, the Grizzlies were a very good team for the entire regular season with a very good offense. And the guy who was in large part responsible for that offense, though my understanding is he had a lot of help from his assistants, that guy gets kicked out just so that you can take the reins again and then play poorly. So it depends heavily on Ja's performance in this postseason. He has historically been a playoff riser, but that does not mean he has not had his bad moments. And if he has a bad series, he might get dealt. That's actually a real possibility. But I'm going to bet on Ja being good enough in the playoffs that the Grizzlies go out in a fairly respectable way. I'm not expecting them to actually compete for a title this year, but be pretty good. As long as that happens, Ja's not going anywhere. So I'm going to give him a 3 out of 10 chance of that potentially happening. On to the Denver Nuggets. Jamal Murray. This is another one where it depends entirely on the playoffs. I think if he shits the bed in a manner similar to what he did against Minnesota, it's time. You got the Jamal Murray playoff rise in 2023, but in 2024, it did not happen. If it doesn't happen again in 2025, I really don't think you can afford to keep paying a guy $50 million a year to average 20 points in the regular season. At that point, you'd be better off just mixing things up and seeing what somebody else can do, even if you technically might be buying high on a player relative to what Jamal Murray's trade value is. Like, I just don't think he can be relied on as a second option. So you need to go elsewhere, even if there is not a super clear-cut option. I mentioned earlier the Kevin Durant trade being a possibility, so if Durant would be traded to the Denver Nuggets, Jamal either going just directly to the Phoenix Suns or being rerouted is a very real possibility, and I hope it doesn't happen because I really loved the 2023 run from the Nuggets. Jamal and Jokic's two-man game was so good. If he does this again, if he's a huge disappointment again, I'd say 7 out of 10 chance that he gets traded. But if he's fine, maybe a 3 or 4, just because the Durant possibility is very significant. If he plays bad, he's especially likely to be dealt. For the Los Angeles Clippers, this is another one that will depend entirely on the playoffs, and I would pretty much say that's across the board for James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, and Norman Powell. I don't think Zoo would necessarily be on the block, although he would be available for the right purchase price. They would listen to offers, but Zoo is young enough that they'd probably try to hold on to him for a little bit, especially just as a source of stability at the center position. It's really helpful for developing young guards to have a center like him who's as reliable. So if they're going in a youth movement, having someone like him who's just a real balancing force, I still think they'd hold on to him. But if they played bad in the playoffs, if it just completely was not a real thing in the way that I and many other people have suggested it very well could be, I'd say there's like an 8 out of 10 chance that all 3 of these guys get dealt. Maybe more like a 6 or a 7 for Norman Powell because, I don't know, he's younger than Harden and Kawhi, but he's not young either. So I don't know. I think they'd probably deal him too. Maybe they would try and see about just being a respectable team with Norman and Zoo as a duo, so that's plausible. The Clippers have historically shied away from just outright bottoming out. Even after the Lob City era, they only missed the playoffs once before they were back in again with like Tobias Harris and Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell. So historically, we have seen that they try to keep the ship afloat well enough. So I guess Harden and Kawhi would be on the move, like for sure, if they were a disaster in the playoffs. But I don't think they're going to be a disaster. I think, like the Grizzlies, it's more likely that they just have a respectable second round exit, and that's enough to, or even a respectable first, depending on who they match up with. And that's enough to trot this team out there again. But with Kawhi and Harden being the ages that they are, with Kawhi being the unreliable player that he is, I would not be shocked if they were like, we're just done with this experiment. Let's move on to a new era. It's just more a matter of whether or not Norman Powell would be a part of that era. The Minnesota Timberwolves, I'm going to say Julius Randle is a 7 out of 10 to be moved. And that could be, that'll also depend on the playoffs a ton. I have a 7 out of 10 because I'm leaning towards it being more likely than not that he ends up being a problem for the Timberwolves in the postseason because he's just historically been a bad playoff player, and I think the fit is still bad even if it has looked good a lot towards the end of the year. And the fact that it has is the reason that I'm not even all the more sure that Julius Randle would be dealt. I mean, there was discussions about him getting dealt at the trade deadline, and like he was clearly there because of a financial decision, not because they were like, oh my God, we've got to get Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert in the same front court. That's how we win a title. No, I'm quite sure Julius Randle will find himself on another NBA team this next year because I just don't think that the Timberwolves can reach the heights that they want to while he is their second option. The Sacramento Kings, Domantas Sabonis. I'm thinking a 7 out of 10 on this one. I'm thinking that's pretty likely because the Kings do not really have a lot of avenues to improve. They mostly just have avenues to remain competitive-ish. And I just don't know how much Sabonis wants to hold up with that. He's also someone who's encroaching on 30 if he isn't already. He's 28. Rudy said 10 out of 10 Sabonis is gone. I don't know. Maybe I'll bump it up to an 8. It does seem really likely because it's not just that it makes sense for the situation. He has, I believe there was some statement, or maybe it wasn't a statement, but some leak from behind the scenes where he was talking to the front office like, so what are we doing, guys? What's the plan here? Probably like the first time I've ever heard of Sabonis having a direct interaction with the front office being like, what the hell? So yes, Sabonis, I think that's a very likely deal. For the Dallas Mavericks, Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis, I think there's a 5 out of 10 chance that Kyrie is on the move. Now, that probably wouldn't be through a trade. It would probably be through him declining his player option and signing elsewhere. Of course, a big reason why Kyrie committed to this team is because Luka Doncic was going to be there. So the fact that Luka's gone now and they replaced him with a guy who's consistently hurt and older, and the ball handling responsibilities are back completely on his shoulders. The isolation scoring is mostly on his back, even though AD has a good amount of that in himself. He's still getting most of his offense assisted. So yeah, Kyrie kind of got stranded on an island out here, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if he was like, fuck this, I'm going somewhere else. Kyrie is not afraid to press the fuck this, I'm going somewhere else button. And if there was ever a reasonable circumstance for it relative to why he's asked out in the past, this one is it. And I think that the odds of that are high enough. I would say about a 5 out of 10. The way that the Mavericks save this, maybe he likes playing with Anthony Davis, and maybe they orchestrate a Kevin Durant trade, in which case a lot of the scoring burden would be taken off of Kyrie. Some of the ball handling burden would be taken off of him, and it would be more reasonable for him to want to stay. But I got a 5 out of 10 for Kyrie Irving, but I have an 8 out of 10 for Anthony Davis if Kyrie Irving leaves. If Kyrie's gone, there's no way they're like, let's retool around Anthony Davis. I mean, shit, maybe they'd try it given what they did, but if I were to wager a guess, Kyrie leaves, Nico Harrison gets fired, and the new GM trades Anthony Davis. I really just don't think a career could survive that, given how happy to trade GM, or happy to fire GMs, a lot of owners are. I think AD goes if Kyrie goes, and I think there's a decent chance that Kyrie goes. For the New Orleans Pelicans, with Zion Williamson, I'm going to go with a 5 out of 10. There is a very real possibility that they just decide to sell high because he is playing at a level that he has not played in a very long time. And if you're just like, we got to cash in on this guy while he's doing what he's doing, then makes complete sense. But Zion's trade value, probably not that high. Higher than it was a couple of months ago, but still not all that high. And it's certainly not going to get you anything resembling a superstar franchise leading option, which is what Zion still has the capability of doing, even if it's been a rough road to get here. So I think the Pelicans, more likely than not, would just say we're going to do the Zion thing another year and see. But it would also not shock me at all if they were like, let's cash in while we can still get a substantial return from this guy, like 2 first-round picks and a pretty good player. It would be reasonable, but I think the Pelicans have little else to bet on. They'd probably be wise to stick with their guns for another year, even if it means trading him a year for now and not getting nearly the value that you would have. I think it is worth the risk to hold on to him. And with the Utah Jazz, I'm going to go with an 8 out of 10 for trading Lauri Markkanen. The only reason I wouldn't go with an outright 10 is because his trade value has dipped substantially because he has not played very well this year after being an all-star his first year there, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. They've finished the season with 37 wins, but he was playing unbelievable. The problem for Lauri is he's a play finisher. He is a play finisher through and through, and you need good playmaking around him to maximize his ability, and the playmaking around him has only gotten worse. Isaiah Collier has been a big step up in that department, but I think his assist averages is, if anything, more indicative of just how lacking in playmaking the rest of the team is. Like, Keontae George has a little bit of that to him, I guess. there's just not as much playmaking here as I think Lowry needs, and it'd be more ideal for him to be traded to a team where that is an option. He's also making a shitload of money. He got paid like 50 M's a year. Yeah, he's at 46 up to 49 in 2027 and 53 in 2029. So yeah, he's got a 4-year deal where he's making nearly $50 million every single year. That is rough, dude. That is a hard sell for a player who this year is averaging 19 points per game. I believe that he is a lot closer to the all-star that he was, a lot closer to the 23 that he averaged last year while shooting 40% on 8 attempts. Just a down year on a bad team that he really needs to not be on anymore. It was nice that it gave him the opportunity to display what his talent could be with more of opportunity, but it needs to be limited. His role needs to be limited. He is not a first option. He is a phenomenal second option. Play finishers of this caliber are really hard to find because Lauri Markkanen, being a 7-footer, he shoots 70% around the rim. For his last, he's down to 64 this year, which isn't very good. But for the last 4 seasons, including his last Cleveland one, 69.7% from 0 to 3 feet and 38% from 3. On top of that, his floater range shots, 3 to 10 feet, he's at 50% from there, which is really, really good. And even his mid-range numbers are pretty fucking respectable, especially for decent enough volume. It's about 10 to 15% of his shots, depending on the year, and he can hit them. So he just simply needs a guy who can set him up. Another shooting stat to highlight here, his assisted percentage. 97% of his threes are assisted and 68% of his twos are assisted. So he's a great finisher. He's a great catch and shoot guy. You just need somebody who is very good at setting them up for both of those, or a team that is very good at setting them up for both of those, because playmaking, you don't need a John Stockton situation. You don't need it to be all one guy. But yes, Lowry needs a different situation, and they weren't able to trade him this year because of contract stipulations that just made him not movable. He's going. He's got to be going. If we are to assume that every player that I gave a 7 out of 10 chance or more, and that's a 7 out of 10 chance not dependent on the playoffs, but 7 out of 10 regardless, that gives me 7 stars that are on the move. 7 of them, with 2 more guys who are in that category of just could be dependent on the record. So let's say we get that. That gets us to 9. While I would be shocked if all 18 of these guys got traded, I do feel like big star deals around some of the best players in the NBA kind of compound on each other, where when one happens, another is going to happen and another is going to happen. When you get an offseason where like 2 crazy deals happen, it's more likely than not you're going to get a 3rd and a 4th. And this is the type of offseason where there's enough teams who know what they are, and there's enough teams who know they need to stop being what they are, and they're all very motivated. We have one of the more competitive leagues we've ever had. There are more teams who are willing to buy in on winning a championship, and because of that, the teams that are on the outskirts of that are all the more cautious of that. If like 12 to 15 of the players that I mentioned in this video got dealt, I wouldn't be too shocked. It would be up there in terms of just the amount of all-star tier players getting dealt in one offseason, but there are a lot of teams with a lot of talent in bad situations. Historically, being a star player meant that you were probably going to be in a good enough situation, and the only reason you would get dealt is because good enough wasn't good enough. But now, every team in the league has a star-ish level guy, more or less, and many of those teams, many of them need a complete direction overhaul. Like, of the teams just mentioned in this video, the Sixers probably do, the Hawks do, the Bucks do, the Hornets do, the Phoenix Suns do, the Clippers might. The Timberwolves don't need a complete overhaul, but they need some changes. The Kings do, the Pelicans do, the Jazz do. Just like, they need a new direction, they need to change some things up, and it seems very likely that they will. This offseason could be fucking ridiculous. It might be the greatest one that has ever happened, and I'm just releasing this video so I can call my shot. If that ends up being true, boom, I'm a genius. And then if it doesn't, then I will just ignore it. That's how you do this. That's how you cope with doing this job. High volume take shooting means you just have to not care as soon as you fired your shot. We are truly Dion Waiters around here. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. And thank you so much to Nick for editing this video, especially because this is a slightly longer one than normal. That is it. Goodbye.